Hi, this is JP Morgan.
And this is Kenneth Merrill.
Today on the Slanted Lens, we're going to talk about why shooting on film is the best possible way to learn the settings and to understand your camera before getting into the digital world that'll swallow you into automatic world and puke you out the other side, a really poor photographer not really knowing what to do. So let's get started. We got Cleo King with us here. She's our model today, and we're going to take pictures of her out here in the flowers. It's like the super bloom in California. It really is super bloom in California.
It's really beautiful.
It's fabulous. So the first thing we're going to learn, and I think that shooting on film really teaches us, is it teaches us to have to stop and to think about camera settings. We're not going to do any aperture preferred, shutter preferred, totally, P mode for professional. It's going to be manual all the way, and it makes you think about your shutter and your aperture. How much depth of field do I want with my aperture? Do I want a shallow depth of field? Do I want a deep depth of field? And you make a decision about that. What can I get out of my shutter? Do I want to stop action? Do I want to blur the action? You know, if it's going to be above a 60th of a second, I probably got to get on a tripod. I think being on film just makes you stop and think about the settings.
And when you're starting out, don't worry about it, because if you're a beginner in photography, it's going to take you a while to kind of catch on to how much motion can be captured with this, with a quick shutter, slow shutter, and how much depth of field you're going to have with the apertures. But you'll learn as you go, and I think honestly it's key to just kind of go through a couple rolls of film, trying different apertures, trying different shutter speeds to see what they look like.
Absolutely. As you look at those different shutter speeds, go back and look at the images and think about your settings. Did you get what you were thinking of? Did you get what you're after? It really does help, and a lot of people have a hard time with this concept. Take and make notes for each one of your exposures on these 2 or 3 rolls of film you're going to do as you introduce yourself to film, introduce yourself to the manual settings of your camera. It's going to make you, as you write those down, it's going to make you think about it, then go back and look at them and see how do they match? What did I get? Do I like what I got? First, we're going to take a meter reading. This is one thing that using film teaches you to do, is to think about light. We have a 400 speed film. We're going to be shooting at 200. And what that does is give us a very healthy, dense negative. We're going to take that meter reading straight back towards the camera, and that gives us a combination of both the highlight and the shadow reading, and that's going to give us our best exposure here.
The really cool thing about a light meter is that it's giving you a true value of how much light you're getting in the scene. Even I've been doing photography for a couple of years now, even I, shooting digital, will shoot a photo and look at the back of the screen and think, oh, that's too dark, or that's too bright. And the problem with that is there's so many factors going on there between the exposure you're getting on the sensor, how bright your LCD is, how bright it is outside, and how adjusted your eyes are to that. So there are a lot of things that can go wrong just by looking at the photo that you took and trying to judge the exposure based on that. Using a light meter, even a reflective light meter in your camera, is going to give you a truer idea of how bright your image is from the get-go.
So this just becomes the craft of taking a meter reading and understanding what your camera's doing. So there's your second one. Number 3, and probably the most important reason you should learn how to shoot on film versus shooting with a digital camera, is that it makes you stop and think and compose. You're kind of in the experience of taking and doing photography. You have to think about your exposure because you only have 36 of them, or 12 of them if you're on 120. So it just makes it so it's a much more deliberate process. You compose, you think about your light, you take a reading. It kind of puts you in the moment of doing photography rather than just shooting, spraying and praying. And in doing that, I think you just get a much better product. It causes you to think about your design and how you're going to design the frame. It makes you think about your exposure. It makes you think about how the light's changing around you. It's just a much more intuitive process than just shooting with digital, shoot, 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 and run. And in that, I think it makes you a much more kind of craft-oriented photographer, and allows you to really get much nicer images. Then when you go back to your digital camera, you can learn how to apply those principles of that digital camera, and you're more in the moment. You're shooting and you're composing, and you're not just relying entirely on what's on the screen, what's on the screen. Thoughts on that, Kenneth?
Absolutely.
There you have it. So there's some of the reasons why shooting on film turns you into a craftsman photographer and helps you understand how to shoot manually with your camera.
I started shooting photography on a film camera, and I'm really grateful that I did. I'm too lazy, and I wouldn't have done such a diligent job at learning how to actually shoot and understanding what the settings do on my camera, understanding how light works, understanding composition.
Now, understandably, there's a lot of different ways you could do this on a digital camera, but it's just hard to be disciplined enough to make yourself do it on a digital camera. Also, it just doesn't teach you all these different principles the way a film camera does. So check out a film camera. We're now going to talk about some equipment things you need to know in order to get that first film camera. A special shout out for our sponsor for this segment, which is Richard Photo Lab. Send your stuff into Richard. You'll love the kind of scans and the work you get from that lab. All right, so what's the best film camera to get if you're going to do this little experiment and teach you about the settings on your camera? A cheap camera. This is an f2, and they're probably $150, $200 now online, so that's pretty expensive. This is an Argus.
I personally wouldn't recommend this. It's pretty difficult to shoot, and I mean, the fastest shutter speed is 1/300th of a second, so.
So it's not the best choice, but like an old Canon.
You know, like I've seen Canon AE1s, those are classics, very easy to use. I've seen them for just over $100. I think the first camera I got was a Minolta X11 something, and I got that for under $100. So you don't have to spend very much money. I think the key is it works properly. It
gives you all the settings, the options.
Yeah.
You gotta have shutters, aperture, shoot on manual. You don't need a meter, it doesn't need to be autofocus, none of that stuff matters.
I would recommend going to keh.com. They sell tons of old used gear, and you can usually get a pretty good deal. It's a little bit more than eBay, but they're more reliable.
It's a lot more reliable. The reality is, everyone probably has an old camera at their grandma's house, at their, their parents, or, I mean, most people have old cameras laying around. And if you're a photographer and you let people know you're interested in old cameras, it's amazing how they kind of just show up. Film to shoot is very easy. A Portra 400, shoot it at 200 is probably the best place to start. Fuji 400H is a great film as well, but I like the Portra 400. So the thing you're gonna do though is you're gonna get your roll of film, you're gonna put it in your film camera, and then you're going to set up anyone, a person, your friend, whatever. Get a person in the shot so you can see skin tones, and you're just gonna go through take a meter reading, and then you're gonna go through your apertures. Here's 2.8, here's 4, here's 5.6. Just go through the whole range, aperture shutter combination, so it's always the same exposure. Remember, you're cutting your film speed from 400 to 200, so you get a dense negative. And just go through all your apertures in the same setup and the person in the same position. And then look at how the apertures change, how the depth of field changed. Some people will do this on a clothesline with, the old clothesline, clothespins hanging down, so you can start to see how much it comes into focus. But something that allows you to understand depth of field. And then change your position. Go back to a full body and see what a 2.8 does, what a 5.6 does, what an 8, what an 11 does in a full body. And just look at those things. It'll help you understand really more what's going on in manual settings of your camera, how to work your shutter and your aperture.
For your first lens, I would recommend a 35mm or a 50mm. 50mm is going to be the cheapest to get a nice, good 50mm, and that's also going to be kind of close to what your eye sees in terms of depth and stuff. So finding a good 50mm, usually a lot of these cameras come with them, and that'll get you going. Honestly, you could probably shoot on that thing forever and not have to invest too much else in the gear until later on.
So remember, this is really a training exercise, a basics training exercise to make sure that you understand the basics and you can learn how to apply them to your digital world. We're not saying you should shoot film, although you'll find that as you shoot and process that you'll love the way things look. So you should you'll start shooting some film after you've done this a little bit because it's a great look. So there you have it. Reasons why to shoot on film, camera you should get, film you should get, exercise you should do. So get out there and make it happen and keep those cameras rolling.
And keep on clicking.